You might have seen our 52 Weeks of Dishcloth series on the Knit Picks website, on our Facebook page, or on Instagram. And one of our most top downloaded patterns is this here, the Starflower Dishcloth. It is knit in Dishy, and it's great for busting your stash. You don't need a lot of yarn. You can even knit this in a solid color. And you can get the pattern for free as a download on the Knit Picks website. Simply search Starflower Dishcloth and you'll be able to download yours for free. We're going to be using Dishy for this tutorial as well. We're going to start with purple for the center, and then we're going to use this light pink for the border. You're also going to need US 8 double pointed needles for this project. It's going to start at the center here, and then we're going to work outward, and then this border is actually worked sideways all the way around the circle. So there's just a few different techniques that you might be not familiar with in this pattern, and we're going to use this video to show you how to get over those hurdles and how to do those techniques so you can make this dishcloth for yourself too. So let's get started. All right, so the first step is we're going to do what's called a circular cast on. To do this, you're just going to need one of your double pointed needles. We're going to start with a simple overhand knot, just like this. You don't need a lot of length on your tail here, so you don't have to worry about it if it's slightly shorter. Next, you're going to take your double pointed needle and you're going to wrap your yarn that's attached to your ball around your needle. And you want to do it by going with the yarn over and to the back. Next, we're going to take our needle and go into the middle of the circle and grab the yarn. So that way you're placing it over from the front to the back again, and then pull it up through that middle of the circle. And we're going to keep doing that same thing between these two steps until we have 8 stitches on our needle. So I'm going to wrap it over my needle. I'm going to go into the center and wrap it over my needle. So I have 2 more. I'm going to repeat that a couple more times. All right. So that is what's called the circular cast on. If you're familiar with crochet, it's somewhat similar to the magic ring or magic loop. So now I have my 8 stitches on here. And this is why it's called the circular cast on, is because then you can pull on this tail and it cinches it up. You don't have to do it really tightly. You can leave it loosely, and then once you've knit a few rows, you can pull on the tail end to kind of cinch it up a little bit more. Now I'm going to distribute the stitches onto my other double pointed needles. I'm just going to start with 3 needles right now, but if you want, you can definitely distribute your stitches across 4 needles. I'm just going to do 3 because there's not that many stitches to work with, and having fewer needles makes it a little bit easier. So I'm going to knit 1 round going across all 3 needles, and then I'm going to purl 1 round since I'm doing this in garter stitch, and it's just going to be knit 1 round, purl 1 round, and then I'll meet you back here afterward. Alright, so I've knit 1 row and purled 1 row, and now I'm ready to start my increases. This increase is going to involve a knit in front and back, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So what you do for that increase is you knit just like you normally would, 1 stitch, but you don't slide it off your needle. What you do now is take your needle tip and you go into the back of the stitch. Wrap your needle tip around and pull it through the stitch, and then slide it off your needle. And now I have 2 stitches where I had 1. And you're going to do this across the entire row. So I'll show you how to do that one more time. I'm going to go into my stitch. I'm going to knit it just as I normally would. But instead of sliding the stitch off right here, what I'm going to do is knit into the back of it. So I'm going to be working a knit front and back on every stitch to the end of the round. On the next round, I'm going to purl every single stitch to the end of the row. And that's going to be an even row. And you're going to work purls across every even row. On every odd row, you're going to be working an increased row. So once I finish row 2, where I'm purling across, I'll meet you back here. All right, I finished the first 2 rounds of the pattern and I've purled across row 2. Now I'm ready for row 3, an increase round. What I'm going to do is knit the first stitch and then you do an increase, a knit front and back increase on the next stitch here. And you're going to repeat that to the end of the row. Then you're going to go back to the even round and purl, and you're basically going to be following this increase pattern in a way where you increase 1 stitch in between the increases. So for example, on the stitches here, I knit 1 stitch and here are my 2 increases. I knit 1 stitch and here are my 2 increases. On round 5, I'm going to knit 2 stitches and increase with a knit front and back into this one. Knit 2, do your knit front and back increase, and so on and so forth. So after a few rows, you'll be knitting 3, doing your increase, knitting 4, doing your increase. So you want to increase the number of stitches that you knit and then do an increase by 1 on every odd round. And on every even round, you're going to be purling. So I'm just going to be going forward in that same pattern until I've reached 72 stitches on my needle. That's going to get me to the size of the center portion of this dishcloth. Once I'm there, I'll meet you back and I'll show you how to do the edging. All right, so I finished knitting the center portion of the dishcloth. I've gotten 72 stitches and then I've purled 1 more additional row according to the instructions. The instructions will also tell you to then knit 1 row in your new color that you're using for your border. So this is where I'm at. The next step is going to be following the chart where you're going to be knitting on the border perpendicularly. So before we get started, I'm just going to go over a few things in the chart with you. So this is what you're going to see when you get to this point in the pattern. We're going to be starting down here, and it's going to tell you that you're starting on a wrong side, and we're going to be reading this from left to right. So we're going to be working back and forth perpendicularly in this point in the pattern. So on row 1, we're going to be reading this left to right, and then on row 2, we're going to be reading this right to left. This portion here, the grayed out boxes, those represent stitches that aren't there yet. You can see from this little circle right here, those are yarn overs. So we're going to be increasing to get that petal portion of the border. And then these little notch marks here, they represent bound off stitches. So that's how we're going to add in stitches and increase this portion of the pattern, and then we're going to take them away, essentially, again. So it is helpful if you have a little bit of chart reading experience, but if not, don't worry. We're going to go through an entire repeat of this, and once you have that down, you're just going to be doing that 12 more times around the pattern to complete it. So let's get started. All right, so let's get started on the border. The first thing you want to do is cast on 5 extra stitches. To do that, I'm going to just wrap the yarn around my thumb here and then take my needle tip, go up through the yarn here and then pull down. I'm going to do that 5 times. All right, so now I've cast on the 5 extra stitches for my border. Then you're going to turn your work and start the chart. So starting from the chart, we have 4 dots right here. And if you follow down to your legend, you can see that this dot is telling me to knit, and we're going to be doing this on the wrong side since we're reading left to right on row 1. So we know that we're going to be doing the knit stitch 4 times, and then we're going to be knitting 2 stitches together. And I know that because I'm just following the legend down here and then reading what it tells me to do for the wrong side. I'm going to knit 4 and then knit 2 together. So I'll just start with my cast on stitches right here, knitting 4. All right. Now I'm going to knit 2 together. And this is the point now that might get a little bit tricky, because normally you think that we would be going across the stitches as you normally would, but instead we're going to be working back and forth on these stitches here, and that's going to create that perpendicular border. So I'm going to turn my work around and then follow the next row of the pattern. And I'll just go over that really quickly here. From this little V on the right side, it tells you to slip the stitch as if to purl, holding the yarn in back. So I'm going to slip my stitch, and then just an empty box here on the right side represents a knit stitch. So I'm going to slip a stitch, knit 2, yarn over, and then knit 2. And then I'll turn my work again to work the 3rd round of the border. So I'm going to hold my yarn in the back and slip it as if to knit. Then I'm going to knit 2, do a yarn over, and all that simply means is place your yarn over your needle without knitting anything. That's going to create the little lace hole that you see in the border. All right, so we have row 2 of our border. We turn our work again. Now I'll quickly go over what we're doing on the next row. Again, these little dots, they just represent knit stitches on the wrong side. So now I'm going to knit 5, knit 2 together. And when you get to that yarn over, you just knit into the stitch, and it's going to create that little hole there. All right. And now you can see this is how your work is going to be connected to your center portion. This little stitch is the part that belongs to my border. This next stitch here, and you can tell by the gap, is a stitch from my needle that's connected to the center portion. By knitting those 2 together, I'm going to be attaching the border onto the center portion as I'm working this border. So every wrong side, you're essentially eating up one of these stitches on your needles, and it's going to be moving across your center portion. All right, so now I'm on to row 4. I'm going to slip a stitch, knit 3, yarn over, knit 2. So I'm going to slip a stitch in that same way, my yarn in back, and I'm doing it as if to purl. And now I'm going to be knitting 3 instead of just the 2 that we did previously. Doing a yarn over and then knitting 2. All right, and then you turn your work again. Now we're on to row 5. And this is a pretty similar pattern as we've been doing, but we're gonna knit 6 and then knit 2 together. So the amount of stitches that you're knitting is increasing because of those yarn overs. And again, when you get to that yarn over, just go ahead and knit into it. And now you can see I'm at the point where I'm reaching that little gap, and that's the gap between your border and the stitches on your center portion, and I'm gonna knit those together. Next, I'm gonna turn my work again. All right, so let's take a look at what we're doing in row 6. We're gonna be working in a similar way by slipping the first stitch, and now we're knitting 4, doing a yarn over, and knitting 2. So we'll just be doing that in the same way we've been doing, except for with that extra stitch. So I'm gonna slip my stitch, knit 4, I'm gonna do my yarn over and knit 2. And then I'm gonna turn my work around. And let's see what row 7 has in store. You can see it's pretty similar. Now we're gonna be knitting 7 and then knitting 2 together. All right, and I've reached that little gap in my stitches where my border meets the stitch from the center portion, and I'm just going to knit that together. Then turn my work. All right, so now we're on to row 8, and we're going to slip the stitch, knit 5 stitches, yarn over, and knit 2. So we're getting close to finishing the first repeat of this border. You can tell it's a little bit finicky, but as you work it, it'll become a little bit easier and easier. And then I'm going to yarn over and knit those last 2 stitches. All right, turn the work again. Row 9 is in a similar way. You're just going to be knitting all these stitches here, these 8 stitches, and then knitting 2 together. You can kind of see it's taking shape a little bit here. It's not going to look like a lot in the beginning until you get that first repeat done. And then after a few more, the pattern is really going to start taking shape. All right, and I'm at that point where I'm going to be knitting 2 together now. I'm going to turn my work again. And if we look at row 10 here, I'm going to be working from right to left, just slipping that stitch, and then working those 8 stitches as knit stitches. And you can notice on row 10, that's where the increases stop. We're not adding a yarn over into this row. So the stitch count is going to be the same for this point. All right, we're going to turn our work one more time. Now we're going to go on to row 11, and there's going to be a handful of items that you want to watch out for in row 11. It's a little bit tricky. What you're going to be doing is binding off 5 stitches, and this will become a little bit more apparent as we go through the row, but since you bind off, you're going to have 1 stitch on your needle still, and that stitch is actually going to be represented by this dot here. So when you get to this point, you're not going to knit this stitch because it's already on your needle. And then you'll have 2 stitches left to knit, and then you're going to be doing a knit 2 together. So I'm going to demonstrate this row and point out the little tricky spot to watch out for at the end of the bind off instructions on the chart. And so I'm going to bind off one stitch. This is my second one. And my third one. Fourth. And this will be my fifth bound off stitch. So you can see I already have a stitch on my needle. And here I have the second one I'm going to knit, the third one I'm going to knit, and then I'll knit these two together. There's not really a good way of showing that there's a stitch that you've worked that is already on your needle as a result of the bind off. So I'm going to go back to this chart and just reference what we did here. So by binding off these 5 stitches, the stitch that's left on your needle is actually this stitch here. So once you come across that point, don't worry if this part doesn't match up. That one stitch on your needle from your bind off represents that stitch, and then you'll have 2 left to knit, like I do right here. So I'm going to knit 2, and then work my last knit 2 together of the row right here. All right, so now I have 4 stitches total left on my row. I'm going to turn my work, and let's go over that very last row together. I'm going to slip a stitch, knit 1, yarn over, and knit 2 more. After I've completed this row, I'm going to turn my work, go all the way back to the beginning on row 1, and work the stitches as we've done previously from left to right. And you'll just keep cycling through this chart repeat until you've worked around your entire center circle. So I'm going to work this last row. I'm going to slip my first stitch, knit 1, do a yarn over, and then knit 2. So now I'm all done with my very first repeat of the chart. And this is what it looks like here. So you can see that one petal is complete. I'm back to my 4 stitches down here, which is what we started with over here, and it's going to have a short section, and we're going to increase it out for the next petal. You can also see I've worked across these handful of stitches on my center circle right here. So essentially what you're going to be doing is working the border stitches perpendicularly while at the same time working across your center portion of the circle. Once you're all the way around your circle, you'll just be grafting that final petal, those few stitches, onto your very first one. And then you'll be done with your Starflower dishcloth. You'll just want to wash it and block it and weave in your ends.